Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. The Brooks Houck murder trial should have been a hard case. Crystal Rogers disappeared 10 years ago. Her car was found on the side of the Blue Ridge Parkway with her purse and her cell phone inside, but police have never found her body. They never figured out exactly where the crime scene was. They never found the weapon. They were never even sure how the murder was committed. Yet it took jurors no time at all, under 4 hours counting lunch, to find Brooks Houck and his co-defendant, Joey Lawson, guilty of everything. I put up a post about the verdict, and I got this great comment, which I wanted to talk about. Let me make sure y'all are hearing me okay. I missed there we go. Yep, you are. Okay, great. So I got this great comment from Charlie Delta Whiskey 5842. She said, "Good afternoon, Lawyer Lee. I watched you on Grizzly True Crime this weekend. You predicted that despite the heavy-handed police tactics, Brooks Houck, I'm having trouble with my S's, Brooks Houck would be swiftly convicted. Can you please describe how you knew that with such certainty on tonight's live stream? Was it the jury, their thoughtful questions, the mood in the courtroom? I'm really curious. It was a no body, no weapon, no crime scene case. Yet you were spot on in your prediction. I was so glad you answered that question, as I rested much easier after you said that." Well, thank you for the comment. It was a great question. That is exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. The quick answer is it was really easy for me. And I'm a person who has a lot of doubts. And of course, I believe all of my doubts are eminently reasonable. And this was a case I had a clear opinion on. No questions about it. Did we know whether it was the candlestick in the library or the lead pipe in the conservatory, like from the game of Clue? We did not. But I had no doubt it was Brooks Houck. So special shout out to the first 5 in tonight's chat: Mickey Bassett, Just a Girl, Patrick Brady, Angel LaFawn, and Shiro Sheena. And let's dive in. What exactly was the decision today that the jury made? Well, in under 4 hours, counting lunch, they found Brooks Houck was guilty of murder as a principal or apprentice, which the instructions told them meant maybe you're not sure if he actually did it or, exactly how it happened, but he's still guilty of murder. He's also guilty of tampering with physical evidence. Joey Lawson was found guilty of conspiracy to murder and guilty of tampering with physical evidence. Then the jury was sent back out a whopping 20 minutes to decide to recommend the absolute maximum sentence for both, and that all the sentences not just be imposed, but run consecutively, meaning stacked on top of each other. So for Brooks, that means life in prison for the murder will run consecutively with 5 years for tampering with evidence. I heard a local attorney talking about how he would be eligible for parole in 20 years. That doesn't mean he'd get it. It just means he'd be eligible. Joey got 20 years to run consecutively with 5 years for tampering with evidence. That's even more than his father got. The jury in his case recommended 17 years. So I want to go through tonight 10 reasons that I believe it was really easy for the jury to make this decision. At least in my opinion, it was. The number one reason was Brooks Houck's big mouth. The "you have got to be kidding me" story that we got from Brooks Houck. He gave this in his first interview and continued it with police. So here was the story, and you have to know a little background. The background you have to know is that Crystal told not one, but 2, and possibly even 3, but 2 who testified at trial, people that, hey, this was going to be a really fun night. She was having a special date night with Brooks. They'd gotten babysitters for every kid, all 5, 4 of hers and 1 that she shared with Brooks. Special date night, babysitters, and one friend even wrote her, "So you're going to have sexy time?" She's like, "Oh yes, it's going to be great." And she's all excited about this. And instead, what Brooks said they did, and he said she wanted this. This was Crystal's idea. They went to his family farm where her mother-in-law lived. And you have to know her mother-in-law didn't like her very much. Criticized her hair, how many kids she had, to such an extent that after Crystal Rogers disappeared, the mother-in-law went and dug up the flowers Crystal had planted at the home where she lived with Brooks Houck. Wow. So the mother-in-law didn't like her, but her idea of really fun for this special date night was they would go to the farm where her mother-in-law lived. And it was raining that night. And you would have to assume pretty muddy on a farm, but they walked around. They spent 4 hours trudging through the rain and the mud. And to make matters even more fun, they had a 2-year-old with them. And for some reason, there was no babysitter for Eli. Apparently, Eli was with them, at least according to what Brooks said. So is that really what Crystal Rogers wanted to do on her date night? I find that inherently impossible to believe. And then there's the next morning when Brooks says he went to bed at 12:30-ish. Crystal was up playing games on her phone, and he went to bed. And when he woke up the next morning, Eli was in bed with him, which would be normal, and Crystal was gone. No idea. Just disappeared, vanished. He figured she'd gone off maybe to be with her cousin or maybe her parents. So he wasn't too concerned, but that's it. Last he heard of her, last he saw of her. So the second reason I want to give is Brooks' refusal to give a timeline for really critical time frames. He refused to give any details about where he was on the 3rd of July. His written statement listed all kinds of things that might be on his to-do list, like mow the lawns, do this and that, but absolutely nothing about where he was when. And that's what the detective had asked him to do. Write out a statement that tells me all the details about what you did on the 3rd before Crystal disappeared. So it left out all of this, it gave it just kind of this mush. As it turned out, both cell phone data and video from people's Ring cameras showed that he had been at the farm all day. Well, why not just say that? Wouldn't that be easier to just say, I was at the farm? It gave a pin a location, but he didn't say that. And why not? What was he hiding? Why not just say that? And then from about 4 to 7:15, he had very specific information. Like at this time, I went to this store and I went here and I went home and we had dinner, and it was pretty specific. And then it got kind of loose again. We went to the farm from 7:15 to 11:30. All of that was really odd. He also didn't have any details really about what happened on the 4th. He went to the farm, they had a party, it was all kind of mushy. So the third reason would be Brooks's lie about Crystal Rogers playing games on her phone. Now, the evidence showed that Crystal's phone ran out of power at 9:23 p.m. Then at 11:57 and 9 seconds, someone started up the phone, booted it, and then manually shut it off 30 seconds later. So it all ended in the 11:57 time frame. It did not turn on again for 3 days, not until July 6th when police turned it on. But Brooks said that Crystal was up playing games on her phone with Eli running around the house when he went to bed at roughly 12:30 a.m. on July 4th. Now, in his first interview, he told police that she usually played on her phone. And the defense jumped on that in opening statements. They said, look, he didn't say he was on the phone, she was on the phone playing games. He said she usually did that, probably was. But then the prosecution during the course of the trial played another interview with Brooks by the Kentucky State Police and 2 different clips from an interview by Nancy Grace. And in each of those, he was very clearly stating that Crystal Rogers had been on her phone playing games. Well, that didn't happen. It was only on for 30 seconds, even close to that time frame. The rest of the time, it was completely off. So she was not up playing games on her phone. So the fourth reason would be Brooks's kind of blasé attitude about the mother of his child being missing. He didn't call police. And in fact, he only texted Crystal twice on that morning. And one was a little bit afternoon on the 4th when she was first gone. Didn't text her again until the next morning, tried again. And actually, those were phone calls. And then the 4th, a text message on Sunday saying, everyone's worried. Where are you? But during that time, he didn't notify police that she was gone, even though she didn't come home for 2 days. It was on the 5th that her own parents notified police that she was gone and that her car was found along the Blue Ridge Parkway. So he also didn't answer phone calls from Crystal's family members, including her kids, asking, where's mom? Where'd our mom go? He did, however, answer his own mother's phone call, just none from Crystal's family. Now, the fifth reason would be Joey Lawson's big mouth. His mouth was probably the biggest of all. The statements he made to numerous people, as testified, a number of these were seriously in question because of the very coercive tactics used by the Kentucky State Police, which ran a serious risk of undermining the case that the prosecution had built. But I think the gravamen of it all pushed it over the line for the jury. So let's talk about what Joey Lawson said. He told Heather Snellen, who had dated his father, actually, I think they had even been married at some point. She said she heard them talk about moving. She heard Joey, actually, they were not married. I'm going back on that, but they were dating more than twice. She said that she heard Joey Lawson talking to his dad, Steve Lawson. Steve Lawson was tried in another trial, and the jury actually recommended he receive 17 years. Sentencing will happen later, I believe, in August. So Heather Snellen said, I heard the two of them talking, Joey to his dad, Steve, and they were talking about moving a body at the Houck farm with a skid steer. So her testimony aligned with the fact that Brooks admitted that night at the farm, he was, in fact, burning debris. He admitted the next day he moved equipment around the farm. Now, Joey Lawson also a witness named Charlie Girdley testified that Joey Lawson said that he pulled Crystal's hair and teeth and that he would let the hogs take care of the rest. Probably the single most chilling comment I have ever heard in a case. Girdley said that Joey Lawson also said that he had buried Crystal with a skid steer and nobody would ever find her. Another witness, Rebecca Greer, had been married to Steve Lawson. Here we go, married, which made Joey technically her stepson. He was an adult at the time. Joey also dated her daughter. They had a little girl together. So Rebecca overheard Joey telling her daughter something about collecting $50,000 for moving a car, and it didn't need to be discussed anymore. So a few months later, she confronted Joey about this, and he told her, look, if you want to know any details, you need to ask Steve. So Greer also said she witnessed a fight between Joey and Steve. It was a full force fight, she called it. She said they rode down 30 concrete steps, screaming, cussing, throwing swings at each other. And Joey told Steve, I'm going to let everyone know about the car and how involved you were. And then Joey Lawson's own grandmother, Steve Lawson's mother, testified as well. In the summer of 2022, she said that Joey came to her house. Now, this is a number of years, 7 years after Crystal disappeared. He was very high at the time, she said, but he sat down and he told her she needed to know that Steve, her son, had killed Crystal. And she said, she told Joey, if you're going to say stuff like that, you need to know this is a fact. It can create a lot of drama. So all of those huge statements by Joey Lawson also had a significant impact, even though some of them were undermined by the Kentucky State Police and how they approach these witnesses. Now, the sixth reason would be Steve Lawson's big mouth. He said that Steve Lawson, Charlie Girdley said that Steve Lawson told him Brooks Houck wanted to get rid of the old lady. And Steve said, well, I'm not the one for the job, but Charlie, I think you are. And Charlie said he just laughed and walked away. Now, Stacy Cramner was another witness. She worked for Brooks Houck, and she said that the week before Crystal went missing, Steve Lawson got in Brooks's truck, and for a significant amount of time, they rode around the neighborhood where Brooks Houck was building houses with his business. And she said that was pretty unusual because Brooks didn't usually let workers in his truck. He didn't kind of hang out with them. She was worried they were talking about this construction mistake she and her husband had made when they were working on something. Steve told her, that's not even what we're talking about. He said Brooks and he were talking about a girl that had to be taken care of. How are you going to take care of her? Stacy asked him. And he said, well, she's not doing very well. She has 5 kids. At one point, he said the girl was on drugs and meth. And Stacy asked if he was going to put her in rehab. And Steve said, I wish that was the case. And the witness said, well, Stacy said, I didn't report this because I was afraid they were going to do to me whatever they were doing to this girl. And later she did wear a wire, and he claimed, yeah, I meant someone else entirely, but he did not deny that they had a conversation along those lines. Now, next would be Rosemary Houck's big mouth. She is mother of Brooks and of Nick. And she told, according to Charlie Girdley, she told him that they were better off now that Crystal Rogers was gone. Ever since she'd been gone, they were better off. Another witness, a man named Danny Singleton, also testified that Rosemary Houck, Brooks's mother, told him she wanted to find someone to help get rid of Crystal Rogers. And Singleton said she didn't ask him directly, so he never did anything, like took any action toward it. But he did tell her, if you got enough money around here, you can probably get just about anything done. So he says he didn't see this as a request for him to do something. He didn't take action to do it, but he did remember this conversation. Thank you to Patrick Brady. I appreciate your super sticker very much. Thank you. And Amanda Thee, thank you. I appreciate your comment very much, and I'm glad you've enjoyed the coverage. So reason number 8 that I believe the jury fairly easily could convict Joey Lawson as well as Brooks Houck is Nick Houck's phone. The whole story with Nick Houck's phone was just nutty. His girlfriend at the time, who lived with him and had a 10-year-old son, not with him, but she had the son living there, talked about the fact that they were moving that very weekend. They were supposed to actually take their items and move them on July day that Crystal disappeared. They were going to be moving, finishing up that weekend. And the place they were moving to, she hated that place. It was a rental house, and it was under construction. It was just a construction zone. She said there wasn't even a floor in the bathroom. She's supposed to be taking her kid to this. So she's already mad. And the property is not ready. But suddenly that morning, the 3rd, he announces, I've got to go help my brother with the property. And he just leaves in the middle of their move. And she her dad comes over, helps her start moving, but there are a lot of things they can't, even the 2 of them do. They really need Nick. So she's calling him all day. He never answers the phone. His phone actually went off July 2nd. It didn't come back online until July 4th. And Nick stayed out all night, never came home, never answered her calls, just shows up the next morning like, okay, let's get ready to move. And so his girlfriend not being able to reach him in the middle of this household move is bizarre to me. I find that's calculated to make your significant other crazy mad. I don't know what he could have been thinking. So the white Buick is the ninth reason that I think this was pretty easy for the jury. Coon hunters were out hunting in the property right behind the Houck farm that night. Now, they didn't hear any screams or anything like that, but they were walking down the road through this property, and all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, they come across a white Buick just sitting there in the middle of the road. And it's bizarre. Well, a year later, when Crystal's father finds out about this, and that's a whole nother story we won't get into, but when Crystal's father finds out about this, he puts a post on Facebook. And it turns out Brooks's grandmother, Anna Whitesides, had a white Buick. Well, within 4 days of that post on Facebook, Nick Houck and his grandmother, also Brooks's grandmother, Anna Whitesides, went into Louisville and sold that car. They got rid of it. Police came the next day with a search warrant to see Anna Whiteside's car, and they discovered it had been sold and was now sold and in Louisville. Police were able to recover it. A cadaver dog alerted to the trunk area, in between the trunk and the passenger side. Hair in that trunk microscopically matched Crystal Rogers. It was no DNA profile was able to be found, though. They tested it, but they consumed it, and they were not able to develop any kind of DNA profile. So all they had was a hair that could match Crystal's, in that it was colored and so forth, had dye, whatever. So it microscopically could be the same, but they couldn't say, yep, that's Crystal's. There were also a lot of questions around the cadaver dog and just how efficient he was, how well he could do this task. Nonetheless, all of that smoke around the white Buick certainly added fuel to the fire and gave the jury some to run with. All right, Mildred, do you think the mother I'll save that, Mildred. Let's come back to that. Janet. Janet is elated. Thanks very much for the super chat. I appreciate that very much. And Glenda, I want to say thank you to you as well for the super sticker. Thank you both. All right. So I want to throw a few ideas into sort of the also ran. These are facts that were, I think, important, but they just didn't come out quite as strongly for whatever reason. I'll kind of explain that as we go through. The first was that just 2 days before Crystal disappeared, Brooks Houck got all the windows of his car, the side and back, he got them tinted really dark, so dark that it was illegal. These were 5% tint, meaning only 5% of the light comes through. Obviously, that seems pretty sus, right? And also, Steve Lawson and his wife, Tammy Lawson, right at the same time, were looking into getting their windows tinted. So all of that would certainly look odd. It was just undercut by the fact that the son of Crystal and of Brooks Houck had a congenital eye problem, so that he actually did have sensitivity to light. And Brooks's sister said, who now has Eli, says, yeah, we also tinted the windows in our vehicle because of this exact problem. So I think maybe that came out a little less dramatically than the Commonwealth had hoped. So Rosemary and Nick, Rosemary, the mother of Brooks, the mother, and Nick, the brother of Brooks Houck, removed items from the house where Crystal and Brooks had lived just within a week or two after Crystal vanished. Now, they had rarely gone to that house, one of the neighbors said, before Crystal disappeared. But after she disappeared, they were over there all the time. The suggestion, and she saw Nick carrying 2 white bags out of the house, 2 white bags with handles. Rosemary turned the car around backwards, at least that's what I understood, and Nick put those bags into the trunk. Now, what were those? Were they hiding or destroying evidence? Who knows? But that was one of the things that the Commonwealth brought up. I just didn't think there was enough to sort of make that connect to what had happened. It was there, but it wasn't as strong. The digging up of Crystal's flowers, I found that to be, who digs up flowers that have been planted? But according to what the neighbor said, after Crystal disappeared, Rosemary Houck went over there and dug up the flowers and threw them out. Now, maybe these were wildflowers and she thought they looked messy or something. I don't know the reason. We got nothing other than that she dug up the flowers. And it's for that reason that I put that as, well, that's something, but I don't know that it proves that she murdered or had anything to do with, or that Brooks murdered Crystal Rogers. And then there was what was supposed to be really bombshell evidence about the trek that Steve Lawson supposedly made in the middle of the night, all the way out to where Crystal's car was found on the Bluegrass Parkway, and then back into, and then right after that, he called Brooks Houck. Right in that time frame, he called Brooks Houck. So that was going to connect it all together for the state. That really got muddied up a lot by some of the cell phone testimony and expert witness evidence that the defense brought in. The location on the cell towers where Steve Lawson's phone pinged came from the north, but all the cell towers were on the north side of the Bluegrass Parkway. That means if you're on the Bluegrass Parkway, he should have been pinging from the south on these cell towers. Instead, it was pinging from the north, and he had a very complicated story. Steve Lawson did, Joey Lawson did for this trial, had a complicated story about how he had really been on the road north and running parallel to the Bluegrass Parkway. So he wasn't going to see the vehicle. He was going to do something else entirely. And I thought because that got muddied, it was there, but it wasn't quite as strong or dramatic. Now, the two biggest places where I felt like they really did manage to poke some holes in the Commonwealth's storyline, where the defense made some headway. The number one most important thing, and something that all of Kentucky needs to be sitting up and alerting to, that is definitely something people need to be looking at. And that is the way the interviews were conducted of the witnesses. It was extremely coercive. With Heather Snellen, they threatened repeatedly to take her from her child, to keep her child away from her. And with Girdley, they fed him some information and lines at the right time. It was very problematic. And it ran a serious risk of undermining the case, because here the prosecution had put together a fair amount of information. I think it was strong enough without some of the things that supposedly were said to Girdley and to Heather Snellen. And the very fact that there was so much pressure on them to say certain things gave the defense a lot to talk about during both in cross-examination of witnesses and then on their own case. They put up a whole witness who went through this and said, wow, this was coercive. And it was. So this was, I think, the biggest problem for the Commonwealth, this coerced testimony and how it came out. It doesn't mean that the witnesses were wrong, but it means it gave a lot of question to the jury. It was a lot harder to believe what they had said, given the way that it had come out. I think ultimately the jury probably did. There was enough corroboration of it, but it created a risk that it would undermine not just these witnesses, but the whole Commonwealth case. The other was the lack of a motive. We never really got a satisfying motive for why Brooks would do this. There was a tiny hint that maybe she did the books, but that never really went anywhere. We heard that IRS agents were investigating, but apparently that was just to find motive, and it sounded like they didn't, or they would have produced it and discussed it at trial. There was some suggestion that maybe Brooks Houck was afraid that Crystal Rogers would be leaving, or maybe he was going to kick her out and he wanted to keep Eli and was afraid Crystal would take Eli. But there wasn't any strong evidence. She hadn't filed for divorce. She hadn't left. They were still together. She was looking forward to a date night. So it didn't sound like they were on the precipice and that she was right on the edge of taking Eli. But those were doubts that ultimately I didn't think undermined the case. I think the words of Brooks, of Rosemary, of Joey, of Steve, all of those put together, plus the other things I mentioned, to me, really put down a reason for the jury to find that Crystal Rogers had been murdered by Brooks Houck, that there was a conspiracy with Joey Lawson, and to find that evidence was tampered with. All right, well, let's take a few questions. I really appreciate all of you who have followed along on the trial with me. I hated that it was not televised. I think it's such an important trial. Excuse me. So if you would, please put questions in front of your question. That'll give me a better chance to see those in the live stream. All right. Let me make sure. I said I would come back to Mildred's question. Do you think the mother will ever be charged? So Mildred, let me answer that question as I believe that one of the most important things the prosecution was waiting for was to see what happened here. Did the jury, I mean, obviously, if the jury couldn't find Brooks Houck and Joey Lawson guilty, there is zero chance that Rosemary Houck or Nick Houck will be found guilty. So that's one thing. They now have that answer. Not just a yes, but a definite yes, a quick yes, we have no questions, absolute yes. Yes on less than 4 hours counting lunch, and stat those verdicts, stat those consecutive sentences, absolute maximum in 20 minutes. So no question about it. And the state knows now it has a strong enough case. Clearly, the case against Rosemary Houck is a lot less certain. One of the big questions that a lot of people have had is whether or not Nick had any role in the murder of Crystal's father. He was shot about a year after Crystal. He and his grandson were standing there about to go hunting, and he was suddenly shot on his own property, and no one was caught. At one of the pretrial conferences, the prosecution got up and said that they had obtained a gun of importance in that particular investigation. And they had, an undercover agent had bought it from Nick Houck. They had tested it, and it had 4 of the 5 markers of the gun that would have killed Tommy, I believe Ballard is the last name, Tommy Ballard, the father of Crystal. And then we heard absolutely nothing else. We never heard what happened with that 5th marker. Was it positive? Is this the gun that killed Tommy Ballard, or what happened? The next time we heard anything was in Steve Lawson's trial about a month and a half ago, when there was talk of Rosemary and Nick having conspired. We heard much more direct statements in the opening statement here in this trial. The prosecutor, Shane Yun, told us that Nick Houck and Rosemary Houck were conspirators, and that they had conspired in the murder of Crystal Rogers, but they had not yet been charged. Now, I had a talk about this with someone who was there. I do not recall him saying unindicted conspirators. I wonder, does that mean they've already been indicted? I don't know the answer. What I do know is the prosecutor said from the moment we got in that courtroom that he had his eyes set on Nick Houck and Rosemary Houck. It may not be just for this case. It may be also in connection with Tommy Ballard's case, but we don't have enough information to really answer that yet. I think this verdict and the speed of it makes it exponentially more likely that Nick and Rosemary will be charged than if this had not happened. So we will wait and see, but it's possible. It's very possible. Let me see. Yes, I did put, okay. Thank you to Janet and Glenda. I think I already thanked both of you. Kimberly, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And Kimberly Jerome is a new member. We're glad to have you. Thank you for being a member. And the Tinfoil Hat Society thanks me for covering the case. Thank you. What a fun name, too. All right, so I'm going to go back over here and look for question marks at the beginning. That'll be my clue. I may not have gone far enough back. Let me, I'm going to start right here. I'll often do that. Sorry about that. All right, Rosie McCrane. How did you happen upon the man you interviewed outside the courthouse? I really enjoyed watching that. You should do more of that in your future trail adventures. It was really fun. I interviewed Jim Brooks. He's a local reporter there in Bardstown, and he had come over for the trial. He's been reporting on this since the beginning. I met him in the courtroom. I may have asked him a question, or, what did you get for this? Or, something like that. A lot of times I ask around if I miss a word, or I'm not really quite sure what a witness said, like, is that what you thought the witness said too? I'll try to pin that down. So that might be how I don't actually remember how we first got talking, but he was so interesting. And I thought people would love to hear this guy. He's really fascinating. So y'all should definitely listen to that. What I really enjoyed about the interview was getting to know a little bit about Bardstown and how this has impacted the town, what people in the town think about this. This was huge, right? A young woman, mother of 5, disappears. And you could tell how deeply embedded she and her family were in the community. Every day of trial, there were 30 members of her family sitting there. And this was not in Bardstown. Venue had been moved away from Bardstown, I think a couple of hours drive away. And they came every day, 30 members of the family. Now, may I say there were also an unusual number for the Houck family. And I say unusual because often a defendant doesn't have very many people present, but every day 8 to 10 range for the defendant. So heavily invested community, quite clearly. Neat Noodle, what are the chances of those interrogations and interviews becoming an issue for appeal? And is there a chance he will get a new trial because of them? I do not think it's very likely that he'll get a new trial. But honestly, I do think those interrogations a big deal needs to be made of them, because this was a problem. It was a problem not just for the witnesses. It ended up being a problem for the Commonwealth. It actually could undermine a case, and that shouldn't be happening. So I hope that there will be discussion about that. But as far as on the appeal, because there was such a quantity of evidence, I don't think that would be anything. I doubt that they will reverse on that, but certainly it could create a problem, and you never know. It may end up being an appellate problem. It certainly matters. Okay, let's see. Looking for question marks at the beginning. Okay, KS asking me. Oh, just saying thank you. I appreciate it. All right. I went out trying to find bluegrass. I told ChatGPT, I want to see horses in bluegrass. Like, this is a thing, right? Kentucky horses, bluegrass. I could not find horses in bluegrass. I don't know where that is. I couldn't even find horses. I drove all around outside Louisville, not Louisville, Bowling Green. All right. Catherine Fraser thanks me. Deeply troubled by the interrogations. Do you think this will be an appellate issue? Several of you are worried about that, and I do understand why. I think it's a big problem. I don't think it'll ultimately undermine the verdict, but it creates risk of that. Definitely creates risk. And I too was very deeply disturbed. All right. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. And pink, of course, the color of Crystal Rogers. All right. And Natasha, your eyes and ears. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a lot of fun. I love a trial. I really do enjoy going to a trial. All right. Looking for question marks. What's next for a case, Lee? Well, I think there are 2 cases that I'm going to dive into pretty heavily. We've got, of course, Donna Adelson coming up, and I'll do some around that and then cover the trial. But the 2 that I want to kind of dive into with us are Corey Richens and the new arrest of Barry Morphew. And I want to talk about why he was arrested again, what went wrong the first time when he was arrested and then the case was dismissed. I want to talk about all of that. But I love getting your input. So if you have some cases you'd like to cover, my goal is to cover the cases everybody's talking about and to make them understandable. So give me your ideas of what you'd like to see me cover. Travelin asked, does anyone know where the youngest child is now? Here's what I gather, that the youngest child is with the sister of Brooks Houck, the one who testified, Rhonda McElvoy. She testified at trial. And I don't know exactly why with Rhonda instead of with the mother. Maybe they even live together. I don't know the answer to that. At one point, there was sort of shared custody, I guess you'd call it, with Crystal's family. But what I was told was that the family was accused of telling the boy that Brooks had killed the mother. And then the boy came home from a visit and said, "Why'd you kill my mother?" And that was something the court took into account and cut off the contact with Crystal's family. So they have not had contact with the boy. And I'm sure that is absolutely heartbreaking for them. How far was Crystal's car from their house and his parents' farmhouse? So I'll have to do a this and that. So the farm was like down here, and I'll have to do it backwards for y'all. Okay, so Crystal's car was over here and his house was up here. And each of those, I think they said that the farm to the house was about 15 minutes. So maybe 10 minutes or so would just be my guess as to where it went. All right. I am looking for question marks at the beginning. Here's Tuna the Clown. Do you think other cases that involved interrogations by those detectives will be looked at? You know what is very interesting to me? Apparently at Steve Lawson's trial, that wasn't really raised. I talked to one of the local reporters about it, and it didn't come in. And the reporter said it really kind of suggested they were kind of rushed into the trial, and they had asked for more time and gotten a little bit more time, but not really. And then that they didn't even cover that. So did they not know about it? Had they not gotten to that? Had they not had the chance to review that? I don't know, but it was something that definitely was a big point for the defense, and apparently was nothing even discussed at Steve Lawson's trial. So that's an example of a trial that it might affect, but if they didn't raise it, didn't bring it up, it probably won't affect appeal. But yes, absolutely. I think this would put defense attorneys on the alert. You ought to be looking at these interrogations. You ought to be considering whether or not these tactics were used with witnesses. This was a very important case, one of the most important. It was the most important case in Kentucky history, I think they told one of the witnesses. And so I think a lot more would have been brought to bear on this case. It's not going to be every case that you're going to have this much going on, but there aren't going to be this many witnesses, this detailed an investigation in every case. So it may not have been at this level, but they did say that one of the detectives had been trained in the Reed technique, questioning and interrogation, just I think the year before, and then that he was using that, but even breaking the rules, even under the Reed technique, which the defense considered aggressive of itself. All right. Did one of Crystal's kids pass away? I'm not aware of that. I hope not. I have not yet seen the homecoming Bardstown had for Crystal's family. I bet it's great. I bet it's really great. Horse farms are in Latin. Well, that explains it, true crime. There was my problem, looking in the wrong place. What does ChatGPT know anyway? All right. Why is it taking so long to come to trial? Lena asked. That is such a good question. And the defense made a lot of hay with that. One of the things they told the jury was, if this has been 10 years, then what makes them think that suddenly now is time to charge somebody? I mean, they went through all the search warrants and all the things that they did, and nobody got charged for 8 solid years. And then finally they charged Brooks, Joey, and Steve. And the reason for that, according to the defense, was that all of a sudden you had a brand new prosecutor in town. They put a super aggressive special prosecutor, Shane Young, on the case, and he was willing to take to trial what other attorneys had been afraid to do or take to trial. It also may have had to do with the arrest of, I believe it was Steve Lawson first on another matter, and then that may have had something to do with how they ended up connecting everything together. So all that to say, we don't know. But it did take a really long time, a super, super long time. All right, looking for question marks at the beginning. Okay, Freed, could you do an update on the Doulos case? Michelle Troconis's contempt of court. Yeah, boy, that got put off and put off and put off. Whatever did out? I'm curious now too. What happened with that? Now, Kent May-Winnie's plea deal, unbelievable. But yeah, I haven't done an update on that in a long time. I may do that. Thank you for that idea. Haystack asking about the quadruple homicide in Pendleton, South Carolina. Thank you. I'll take a look at that. Some nobody wants to know, are you surprised that Joey got convicted? And some nobody was surprised. It was only from Charlie's testimony, I guess. So here's the answer to that. The first is one of the reasons that prosecutors put everybody together in one case is one thing that juries may do is look at it and go, they're all guilty. And all the evidence kind of gets piled on top and they just look at everybody. Oh, they're all guilty. They're all here together. It's hard for a jury to say, okay, this defendant is guilty, but this defendant, there's not enough. There tends to be some bleed over between cases. And I think that's pretty common. It's something defense lawyers complain about all the time. In big cases, RICO cases, conspiracy cases, that you can have a problem with that. But in this case, I really felt like in the last final push, the prosecution really brought some evidence against Joey. And it wasn't, there were two witnesses who were really questionable because of the police tactics. Huge statements, really big admissions by Joey, but the witnesses were maybe a little undermined. But then when they brought his own grandmother, and she said the same thing, and they brought another not impeached witness who had been married to Steve Lawson, and she had kind of a similar story. I think what that ultimately did was give credence to all of the statements. So once they kind of got the idea that, yeah, I think he had something to do with it, then it became possible to look at what Girdley had said and what Snellen had said and say, yeah, okay, I believe those, even though they were coerced. I think that's pretty close. Now that he's convicted and the family is right, this is Veronica, that he killed her, can they get visitation again? They can go back to the court. That's a really good point, because they have been found right by a jury. And I think they can go back to the court and petition for that perhaps, but I don't know what the result would be. I don't know. Also, there may or may not be like grandparents' rights and so forth within that, with Kentucky and the Kentucky jurisdiction. I don't know exactly what the rules would be. Interesting question, though. I would be willing to bet there's effort made to get some custody of the child, at least partial. Can you imagine, though, how difficult it would be after all the years of living with the other family and having been told how unfair this is? Then that is that's going to be really difficult for everyone, I would think. And so they'll all have to just kind of look at what would be best for the kid and try to figure that out. Vibe Check Cheesecake has been a member for 16 months. That's wonderful. We are so glad to have you in the live. Thank you for being here. And Teresa, thank you for the super sticker. Well, tomorrow night we will be live at 7 p.m. Eastern. My current plan is to begin our dive into the Barry Morphew case, barring something else coming up. So I will, and of course we will cover Kohberger when we get around to the actual sentencing and all of that. So I will see you tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern.